Good afternoon, my beautiful peeps, and thank you so much for tuning in to our podcast and watching our YouTube channel, Being the Best Version of You. My name is Ampika Pixton.
And I'm Diane Swain.
So over the last 4 weeks, we've touched on anxiety, how to deal with anxiety, looking at destructive behaviours, also looking at toxic friends and toxic situations. And the last one was quite uplifting actually, wasn't it? It was the 12 steps of building your self-worth and self-esteem. So today we're actually going to talk about something that has very much touched my heart, and I know that it's touched yours, Diane, and it's dealing with losing someone, loss and grief, whether that's through suicide, whether that's through a sudden death, or whether it's a prolonged illness. I'm sure that everyone will be able to realise the pain of losing someone and the impact it has on people's lives that are left behind.
Okay, Ampika, if you wouldn't mind, I've found this poem which is really moving. It's only a short one. Would you read it out before we start with going through everything?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
There you go.
I'll do it with pleasure. So it's called The Truth. The truth is, I will be looking for pieces of you in everyone who comes after you. The truth is, you were everything I ever wanted. Oh my God, this is moving.
I know, that's what it did to me.
And I'll never truly be over you. I want to be able to say that peacefully, calm and collectively. It's just so simplistic, but it's really moving, isn't it?
I know. Is it okay if you just read it slowly one more time? Thank you.
The truth. The truth is, I will be looking for pieces of you in everyone who comes after you. The truth is, you were everything I ever wanted, and you'll never truly be over you.
Thank you, Ampika. That was so beautifully read, and I saw how much it moved you, and that's exactly what it did to me when I read it. And I'm sure that everybody listening is finding that incredibly moving. I think that what that did for me as well is it sort of encapsulates whether we've lost somebody through death, illness, suicide, divorce. It kind of summarises for me every kind of loss and how it sort of gets us in the gut and makes us react the way you did when you read it. What we want to do today is talk about grief and loss and how it affects people differently. What we are really sure of course, is that it affects people differently. Grief and loss is completely personal, it's completely subjective. So whilst we can talk about the different stages and the different ways in which we lose people, we appreciate fully that it's different for everybody. A loss to me is different to a loss to Ampika. A loss to everybody watching today is completely personal. But we're going to try and talk through some areas to give you some guidance and help, whether that's for yourself enduring a loss, or whether it's somebody close to you, a family member, friend, child, work colleague, whoever it might be. Okay, so just running through some of the areas, we're going to look at expected deaths through illness, the natural life cycle through old age. There is a level of expectancy around that when people get to a certain age, of course. Doesn't make it any easier, but that's something that from being very young we obviously learn about the life cycle, and there is an expectancy there. Unexpected deaths, which are accidental or really sudden. We want to talk about that and what that means to different people, and how obviously we're impacted in different ways because of how sudden it is. I want to talk about children's grief as well. We're going to touch on that, aren't we? Quite often people can think the mistake they make, and I've made it myself, in that thinking that because children are so small and so young that they're not impacted by a loss in the family or a friend at school, a grandparent. The truth is that children are severely affected by loss, no matter how that loss comes about. And there's studies that proves that even babies feel loss for sure, not on a cognitive level for obvious reasons, but they can feel the loss of somebody that's close to them. So I think the grief support around children is really important. Suicide and where to get help from. So we're going to be helping you find the right resources, the right websites, the right telephone numbers, the right support groups. There are a mass of support groups out there. We've selected 5 or 6 for you in different areas, haven't we? And we'll supply all the details later, and we'll talk about some of those as well through the programme. Okay, so I think one of the first things we can look at is the stages of grief.
Yeah.
The 5 stages of grief, can't we? There are different models that we talk about in grief. The general one in simplistic terms are the 5 stages, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. And it's the same if we lose somebody through death. And it's the same if we go to a divorce lawyer and they talk about the loss of a marriage. They will generally talk about those 5 stages of loss, because it's the loss of a marriage which to a lot of people is horrendous and devastating. So we're going to go into those stages in a bit more detail. Okay.
So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Diana. I'm sure there's going to be lots of people requesting the telephone numbers and the websites, because we've all at some stage been hit with what you've just said. Grief of losing a loved one, a family member, a brother or a sister, whether it be through any of those that you've named above. I have been very fortunate to get to 38 years of age, and I've only lost one person very close to me. And that was my grandfather. He meant the world to me because he was the actual person who brought me up. So he was my mum and dad. And I was lucky enough for him to live in my house. I managed to accommodate my downstairs in my house to make it viable for him to live with me and have carers come 4 times a day. And my wish was that he died in my arms, and I got my wish. He died in my arms back in 2009 on the 28th of November. I had my son sat on my knee, and I knew that he was going that night, and I thought, I just want to cuddle him and cradle him, and I got my last wishes. But even though it was a very sad time, like you said, he got to an age where he couldn't live any longer. So we all have a life expectancy. So even though it was sad to say bye, and I'm getting emotional now talking about it, I've got nothing but happiness and celebration around him. And even in his funeral, there was no sadness there, because he'd lived a very full and very active life. I thank him for all my fantastic qualities that I've got, thanks to him. All the kindness and the generosity of spirit that I've got is all through him bringing me up and guiding me. So even though, like, talking about it, because he was emotional at the time, I didn't feel anger, I wasn't in denial. I accepted the fact that he's got to die, we've got to die of something. I was just so grateful that I was blessed to have someone bring me up.
Wow, that's so moving. Gosh, my stomach's gone now. That's interesting that what you say about that there was a real level straight away of acceptance because of his age.
Yeah.
And I think, as you know, how wonderful that you got your wish because you were holding him and everything. That's incredible. And it was almost like it felt you're saying that it was his time to go.
But I did notice, looking back, analysing it now, over 10 years ago, was my behaviour after his death became very erratic. So even though I'd compartmentalised it, I'd accepted the fact that he'd gone. He had to go because he was an ill man and he's not going to live forever. And the state of his condition, he was deteriorating. He couldn't get to the point where he could stand up and walk. So it was his time to go.
Yeah.
It still had an impact on my life because I'd lost one of the closest people that meant something to me. So my behaviour became quite erratic, but I'd probably say for a good 18 months. Alcohol was a great crutch. As soon as anything went wrong, it was like, where's the bottle of wine, where's the bottle of wine? And I still hadn't dealt with the fact that I'd lost him. I'd accepted the fact, and it's not like I felt it was unfair, but there is a hole in your life, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah, that's it. And I think any death under any circumstances causes a huge void in people's lives, and it doesn't matter whether that's sudden or the people are in their 80s or 90s. It's a huge loss for people, isn't it? I mean, that there is the natural life cycle, like you say, talking about your grandfather, and then how you survive after that. and almost, because we know after death of somebody there is no normal life afterwards. It will never ever be the same, and you strive sometimes to put it back how it was, but I think that acceptance is that you have to find a new way of living without that person, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about unexpected deaths and sudden deaths, you know, I lost my brother when he was 42 suddenly, and he went to work. He was a lawyer, and he went to work in the morning and dropped dead on his office floor. You know, so we had my little nephew who was 5, and he took him to school, dropped him off at a gorgeous school in the country that he was at, and obviously my nephew was never going to see him again. Yeah. And I remember when the family came round to tell me, because there's just 2 years between us, so we grew up, we were inseparable growing up. I was so close, obviously, to my nephew, and still am. And I remember the family walking through the door telling me, and I just visualised a knife in front of me, literally being stabbed right into my gut, because, you know, my mum said, David's dead, and I thought it just must be a car crash. That's the first thing that I thought of, you know. But it's that finality, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you know you're never going to get that person back, and what that then throws open because of that, the ramifications, the implications, you know. Immediately my thoughts obviously went to my nephew, because he was only 5, and my sister-in-law and her loss, and then obviously my children, because they'd lost an amazing uncle and cousins, and it's like dropping a huge rock in the middle of a calm pond, isn't it? And watching the ripple effect go out.
You don't ever get over something like that, do you?
No, you don't, absolutely. I think that, and what they say, and what, you know, we work with in grief counselling, is that, you know, there is a natural physical process which takes about 6 months for you to adjust, to really accepting, come out of denial and accepting what's really happened, because I think that period of 6 months for people is like shock. And I do think it's shock, and I know from my experience in the suddenness that I couldn't seek counselling, which I did seek myself, bereavement counselling, after about 6 months, because I think that there's a very natural physiological process that you go through before you can almost sit down with somebody and start to, you know, and that fits in very much with the
stages. That's what I'd like to talk about, because one of them is like self-sabotage as well, and that's for you that's left behind. Like you say, we have to grieve. It's a natural process, and we're going to share a lot of websites and a lot of helplines that could help you, you know, start to slowly digest, break down, accept, understand. But like you say, the ramifications of, if you're not dealing with it and it's been a period of time and we're going down the road of self-destruction and self-sabotage and almost being in denial, there are things that, you know, we can talk about here and we can address, because if you're feeling like that you have not got over the loss of someone very, very close to you in very, very tragic circumstances or sudden circumstances, we need to be able to share and explore all of these areas.
Yeah, that's it. And I think it's really difficult for people, because everybody is questioning what is normal, how should I be feeling, you know, and of course there is no normal way to grieve. It is completely personal. In this episode, we're going to go through do's and don'ts of supporting people around you that have been impacted by that, because it's really scary to be close to somebody who's lost a significant other, because we usually don't know how to deal with that, do we? And I know from my point of view, and like you saying losing your grandfather, I know for me losing my brother, you know, I was drinking most nights to numb that feeling, you know. And although I can sit all day long as a counsellor encouraging people to speak emotionally and get out those suppressed emotions, it's really difficult even to practice it yourself, you know, because they're so painful to deal with, aren't they?
That's what I don't understand, is like us as human beings, because we kind of like know that grieving is perfectly normal, but that inner feeling of intense pain that we feel, we need to like just experience it and go through it as opposed to numbing it. And I am like the world's worst person of always looking for an aid to numb my feelings. I try not to now. I try to experience the pain and go through the pain and let the pain come out. But as human beings, we naturally gravitate towards something, don't we, to try and, like you say, buffer it, or cloud or paper over it.
Yeah, definitely.
So would you say, Diane, is to feel that sense of pain and continue to feel that sense of pain? Like you say, it's not how long is a piece of string. There is no set timeline as to you'll feel like this for 6 months or 12 months. There is no recipe where you follow a certain formulation, all of a sudden you'll make a picture perfect cake. It doesn't work like that, does it?
No, that's absolutely right. And I think the first thing is it's very hard to give a prescriptive plan for somebody because it's so personal. And I see people that come to me and say, you know, I've been drinking to numb the pain. And the thing I would never do is obviously take judgment on that, because I think you've got to give yourself some element of help. And I know that is a bit of self-medication, but I know, having done it myself and coming through that and knowing, I remember talking to the doctor about it and telling him what I was drinking, and he said, it's okay, you know, that's fine, so long as, I think, you're sharing it with somebody that cares about you very much, so they can keep an eye on that. And if you don't have the luxury of that, you know, share it with your counsellor or your GP to make sure that you are being looked out for by somebody, you know, because everybody's behaviour is different. And the thing, I think, one of the helpful things is that to keep yourself in a bubble. I know that's what I did for a few months, of keeping just people close to you that you know genuinely care about you. You find supportive, you find comfort in their presence. And, you know, I find a lot of people shrink their social network hugely after loss. And that is self-preservation, and that's so important, you know, and I think that we realise actually the good in a lot of people as well when we go through that. And that is all about self-preservation and keeping yourself safe in that bubble, isn't it? Yeah. And yes, you might drink a bit more for a short time, or we eat a bit more to suppress, but of course the healthy thing to do is always speak about your feelings. That's easier for some people than others, you know. We're not all adept at doing that, but for sure, to get it out is the best way.
So have we got some helpline numbers that we can share? So if you are really struggling and you don't feel that you have got a support network, some of us aren't blessed with a really tight circle of friends, or we feel it would be a burden if we were to share our experience with our closest, or maybe your closest people are all grieving. So the last thing you want to do is open yourself up to someone who's already grieving under the same circumstances. So can we just share some numbers, please, and also some websites where people can reach out and actually talk?
Okay, so there are some great organisations out there which we can urge you and encourage you to contact if you feel that you need them. In general terms of grief and loss, there's organisations like Cruise, Grief Share, the Samaritans, of course. There's websites on the NHS, all of which we're going to be providing for you later on and on the screen as well. In terms of organisations to help support victims of suicide, anybody who has suicidal thoughts, anybody who is desperate just to talk to somebody with any relation to suicide at all, there's Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, and there's also Alliance of Hope website, which is fantastic. Organisation based around suicide loss survivors. It's got forums, support groups, etc. And very recently there's the Hub of Hope organisation, where you can actually download the app onto your phone, and that's got a massive suicide support for all sorts of support needed there, and also self-harm issues as well. Okay.
So Diane, for people that have lost someone through a tragic accident or an instant death or suicide, how do these people manage to carry on living their lives? Is it the same type of grief that you would have if someone died under natural circumstances?
I think it's like we said at the start, isn't it? Everybody's grief is personal, but the thing with suicide is that, or sudden death, is the unexpected. It's the lack of being able to digest and accept the horrificness and enormity because it is sudden. And I think that people who are impacted with suicide, from family members, friends, colleagues, wherever, are sometimes riddled with guilt, and shame because they're asking all the questions, could I have done something about it? That's the biggest issue for a lot of people. Could I have prevented it, because they've taken their own life? And I think that, as horrific and as difficult as it is, we class it as traumatic grief in the sense of its enormity and impact. You can't take that away from other people that lose people in different ways, but it is it's about the guilt that people can be left with, feeling that can they have done more. There are lots of, obviously, support groups that we've talked about for people who have been touched by suicide, impacted in whatever way, and they need to reach out to those people, seek a counsellor to talk things through, but understand that you will find a new normality, but give yourself the kindness and grace that it is going to take time, months and years, to restructure your life in a different way without that person, no matter what they were in your life, friend, family, partner. There are some great treatments for what we would class for suicide grief as traumatic. We deal with it almost like PTSD in a sense, and there are some specialists out there that have specialist therapies like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and I've seen it work for people where they're taken back to the trauma, the suicide, if they've found somebody that has committed suicide, and that can be hugely effective for people. That's EMDR. Obviously we'll give information after the show about this as well. But I think the thing to remember is that to give yourself time to honour your feelings, to keep the people close to you that that love you and care about you in that bubble, to keep yourself supported. Share how you feel, get it out rather than trying to use a crutch. Share how you feel, be open, give yourself time, be kind to yourself, and seek the professional help that you think you might need, either through the organisations, which are incredible, GPs, counsellors, and in time things will get better. And reach out to the people who've experienced what you've experienced, because the value in that is significant.
Thank you very much, Diane. So if there's anything specific that you would like to ask Diane, please feel free to email us on peekaboopeeps@gmail.com. Diane will personally respond back. We will share all the information down below with all the helplines, the charitable organisations that could help you or a family member. And like Diane says, please keep talking and share your experience with others. Other people do care, and we do care about you. And life is never going to be the same, but over time it can certainly get easier. So please share the love, keep on talking, and if you feel that one of these organisations will help you or someone close to you, please feel free to use the information down below and contact them.